Right. Oh, attendees are starting to pile in already. Hello and welcome everyone. We are live. We're just allowing people to log in, and we'll give the attendees sort of a minute or two just to get logged in while everyone either gets their lunch or grabs a cup of tea or whatever, get going. So you all missed a great conversation around Grant and his keyboards. So if we want to carry that on, we're welcome to.
Don't.
We won't open the Q&A panel about Grant's keyboards just yet, because then we'll get off subject and we won't actually get onto the
Do you know how cruel this is, Michael? I'm autistic. That's my thing, right? I could literally spend the entire hour talking about this, and I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. Well, I've got sharks and wild animals in my background, so yeah, that's the difference between you and I.
Well, you're South African. It's what comes with the territory, right?
Yeah. I like to keep the stereotype alive and well. Cool. So we're up to about half the participants we're expecting. So we'll give folks just a minute or two more, and then we'll get going. Puts his glasses on so you can actually see the stuff he's written down.
That helps.
Cool. So we are a minute and a bit in. All right, cool. Shall we get started then? All right. Welcome to our webinar today. We'll be talking about data and AI, avoiding the hype, and how to really sort of get the best value for your business out of data and AI and all that it has to offer. Today, I'll be presenting. My name is Michael Sipe, and I am the host of today's webinar. Please forgive me. It's been about 3 years since I hosted one of these, so I'm a little bit rusty. But yes, I'm the Chief Service Delivery Officer here at 101 Ways, and I will be trying to keep the conversation flowing as best as possible. Today, I'm joined by 3 experts from the industry. We have Alberto and Janet, who are externals, and then Grant Smith, who is also with 101 Ways. But before we get started with allowing them to introduce themselves, we've got some housekeeping to attend to. First of all, there's a Q&A button. So if you have any questions that pop up during the conversation, please hit that button and submit your questions. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, there will be a follow-up blog post where we will then be sort of giving some more detail or answering the questions that we don't get around to. This will be recorded, so this recording will go live on our website in the next couple of days. And towards the end of today's session, about five minutes before it ends, I will be posting a link to a survey into the chat. So if you could take some time, I'll warn you when I do it, and I'll give you enough time to sort of click on and get the link open before we shut the webinar down. So now that I've got all of that out of the way, let's get started with the introduction from the panel. Let's start with you, Janet.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Janet Basterman. I'm Chief Data Scientist at a regulatory technology company called Napier AI, and we provide financial crime compliance software worldwide. I'm also chair of the Royal Statistical Society's Data Science and AI section. And as part of that role, I'm very much keen on ensuring sort of ethical, explainable data science in the UK and beyond. Particularly passionate about a lot of these subjects because there is a lot of hype surrounding AI, and it's always heartbreaking to me when I see companies fail to achieve their goals because they've not planned effectively.
Great. Alberto?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alberto. Right now I'm just basically doing consulting for companies, but until very recently I was leading data and AI operations in Virgin Media O2. And before that, I was at Just Eat, and before that at EasyJet. Like Janet, I have been working in this space for quite a few years, since 2006, 2007. It is great, to see a bit of hype, right? When this topic was a bit ignored many years ago. But yeah, maybe it's a bit too much right now at the moment, and I agree with her on that. Yeah.
Grant.
And hi everyone, I'm Grant Smith. So I am technology director at 100 Roll Maze. My interest in this field really started when I was a sysadmin building infrastructure for data warehouses in the 90s when I worked at AOL. Since then, I've built serverless data lakes at smaller companies more recently, and we've been recently advising clients how they can protect themselves and take advantage of AI. So my interest in this field is mostly around that protection and that take advantage of without spending a bunch of money and not getting any results for it. So like you, Janet, I share that concern that there is a lot of money being thrown around. I'm not entirely sure and there's a lot of value being delivered just yet.
Cool, thanks. So we're spending a lot of Q2 here at 101 Ways talking about data and AI. And this is the first real sort of webinar we're hosting around it. It's a really hot topic, and kind of as Alberto said there just now, you know, the hype may have got a bit too much. What is this hype all about, right? So AI has been around for ages. It's very much a buzzword. It's very much a loaded term. What is the hype around AI, and what's generating the hype?
I think for me, the media are largely to blame. We see an awful lot of news articles that AI is going to come in and it's going to remove everyone's jobs and it's just going to do everything. And I think on the back of that, sort of the business hype cycle comes in, and you get lots of startups saying, you know, we can decrease your costs and we can do X, Y, and Z using AI. And then companies who are further along in the food chain go, well, we need it. And they don't really understand why they need it or what problems they need to apply it to. So it just becomes almost sadly a tick box exercise that you've got to have it. But it's, I mean, I'm sure the panelists will remember this, but you know, when big data first became a thing, everyone had to have big data and you had to have your big data lake. And you know, all of these hypes, they go through this phase where everyone's trying to do it. You end up with that almost that misnomer that everyone thinks everyone else is doing it brilliantly, and on the most part they're not. Until when you peel under the hood, there's a lot of other things going on. So there are very few companies that are doing this really well and really understanding what are the business problems. And it's just this, at the moment, it's a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle. And we are now dipping into the trough of disillusionment, where people are realizing that it's not, so I keep saying, this magic pixie dust that will just, you know, you can just spray it over a problem and that problem will disappear. So I think now that we're starting to move into that area, people are more educated, they're asking better questions, and they're understanding what needs to be in place first before you can apply AI solutions.
Alberto, you mentioned that the hype was getting a bit too much. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that so I subscribe to everything that Janet has said, right? And just to kind of add here a different dimension, I think that is a human component, and this is a piece of technology that when people that may not be so exposed to technology on a day-to-day basis, perhaps the most sophisticated thing is going to be, you know, their smartphone and that sort of stuff, and you know, whatever devices they use at work or applications. But this is a piece of AI, right? That when people can interact with it, it feels, especially those first impressions that everybody got when ChatGPT came live like a year and a half ago, 18 months, something like that, and everybody is impressed, has that first impression about, whoa, okay, this is different. And I think that although the vast majority of the population is not using this thing, even all the potential that it has, they still have that impression that they received that first time they interacted with it, when they kind of brought something about their domain expertise, and this thing just brilliantly and coherently put all those words together in a chain, right? So I think that it has that emotional component. Also, I think that, you know, building on top of that business cycle, right, of startups, you know, and people at the very top trying to kind of, you know, chase share prices and make sure the stakeholders are happy. Obviously, in my experience, they all had that emotional interaction with these Gen AI tools, they all have seen, okay, how cool images, how cool videos, what an amazing text can put together, but they haven't really see when it fails, or even they don't use it on a day-to-day basis, because these are tools that can help you already, but they don't use it. So they don't have that polish experience going beyond that emotional impact of, oh my God, this thing can talk or something like that, right? So it's lack of true understanding of where the tool is not really that fantastic beyond the gimmick of, okay, ask whatever and it will reply to you very cool things. Yeah.
I agree with that completely, and it's just even the language that's being used around when it gets it wrong really irritates me, because we say it hallucinated a few answers, like that's that's fine, that's normal, we don't need to worry about that, but what it really means is it got it wrong. And I keep saying to people, it's like, if you get 40% in a GCSE, you didn't hallucinate the other 60%, you got it wrong. And we're adding this positive emotion to something so that we kind of forget the inaccuracies, and it's okay. And when you're using these tools for very critical systems, that accuracy and the precision of these systems is really, really important. And while it can give you a really coherent and persuasive output that looks great, how do you know that it's right? And there's been some testing where it said it's managed to pass some exams, and broadly most of the answers to the exams are part of its ingested set. So I'm a little bit hesitant to use that as an example. But when you're feeding it brand new data, and in my world, some of the latest finance regulation, and it can't even get the chapter headings correct, it really brings into doubt sort of how you need to use this, because it doesn't have that level of explainability. And as I said, a really understanding of how these things work and where they're useful. And I think the more that we use these tools, and we should be using them, they're there, but as you use them, you really get that understanding of when they are good to use and when you need to generate something that sort of, the image generation is fantastic, and generating, we've had sort of the ability to change text, for years with other tools. So taking, some bullet points that you've got and turning that into a paragraph on much better email, fantastic, huge load off. But when you're summarizing data, particularly data where you need very, very precise answers, at the moment, you do need to be very careful about it, because it won't give you the information to go back to key points in the text to say, this is where I got that from. I'm sure it will, but right now it's not there yet.
And that's the tricky bit, isn't it? In that, but both of you raised this point, which is it does get it wrong, but right now there's no standard or useful test framework to identify when it got it wrong. Currently, mostly, if you're using an LLM, it's a human test to get a sense of, do I think it's wrong or right, which itself has inaccuracies. When we come from machine learning, we have, and I mean, as distinct from LLMs, there are confidence bounds, and there's tools and there's standards we've developed over the last 2 decades to give us a sense of how confident are we of this answer. We don't have that with LLMs. And to your point, Alberto, when someone on the C-suite has that interaction with an LLM and goes, oh my God, this is genius, and it is genius, I'm not taking that away.
Yeah.
Then someone like me has to come along and say, Canada Airlines. Remember Canada Airlines, right? I can't test for that. I'd love to tell you I could build a test so that would never happen, but I've been trying and I haven't figured that out yet. So it's tough, right? The hype is real. It's an amazing thing. And I imagine all of us have used it to make it faster to write an email, to help us put an agenda for a meeting, to get all those things. It's phenomenal at that. But that's because we're looking at that output and saying yes, no to all of those things. We're doing those little tests, in microseconds. Doing that to a piece of, as you say, regulatory data or something that is going to be dependent about my whole business, that's the tricky part. And that's where we have to distinguish between, I think that the fun part of this is that LLM isn't the only tool, as you said, Jana, right? There's a ton of different tools. And I'd love to educate people more about, hey, how do you know if something looks like it's a machine learning problem or an LLM problem, or just a basic statistical analysis problem, or even just a spreadsheet thing you could do, right? And that to me, I think, is part of the fun of this field. Is LLM has given us an extra tool now, and I don't think yet we've even scraped the surface of how might we align those capabilities to get real value out of something. Is something LLM shaped or machine learning shaped or some other shaped problem?
You've just touched on something quite interesting there, because you're talking about LLM, you're talking about machine learning. There's a bunch of different sort of AI tools and technologies. LLM seems to be the thing, kind of to Alberto's point, that's really brought it to the front, right? Someone's interacted with ChatGPT, or they've had some sort of AI on their phone, and that's brought it to the forefront. How do you go about kind of educating your organization when you have your CEO or your CFO run in and go, have you seen that, my Alexa can do this, or my Spotify can do this? Like, how can we get something out of that? How do we go about educating our businesses in sort of AI so that the hype doesn't take over, so that the hype gets the hook? The hype's the thing that gets them interested in it. How do we then educate sort of the not so technically capable in order to understand what our capabilities are versus what is just way beyond what we can do?
For me, it's a bit of trying to kind of present these, cool examples or cool AI as the icing in the cake. And I think that you go back to, for all these things to work, you need to have your traditional way of doing tech. It's as simple as that. If you don't have your, for example, your data estate, your data warehouses, or data models structured in the right way, processed in the right way, so you can then extract them and pass them to the LLM, so it can, I don't know, create a script that is relevant for this customer with these particular attributes, right? Which I have seen examples of. So you still need all those, all things, and all. I mean, they weren't all a year and a half ago. Sorry, but it feels like from the very top, it feels like this is a kind of a magic beast that is going to displace all your tech stack from top to bottom, and you will not need anything else, right? Without really understanding that this is just one more component in all your tech stack. And if your tech stack is still a mess, or there are serious things that need to be improved, this thing is not going to show anything, right? It's not going to do anything. And it works on the same will apply to use cases that are going to be in front of customers, or use cases that are going to be internal, right? It goes back to the whole tech stack needs to be, properly taken care of. That's my opinion, and be very adamant with all these people about that. I think that just one last thing is a pity, because I have seen a lot of big consulting names going there and selling dreams, right? Like, yeah, this is going to change everything, just basically pumping even more the hype, because there's a lot of lucrative contracts, right? And I think that, blaming one here, right? Accenture was talking about 1 billion in contracts for AI. I would be surprised if 50% of those contracts end up kind of delivering some value, being blunt, right? Because they are just basically pumping some spend for them without really understanding that you need to have your tech stack in the right way. Yeah.
I mean, Albert's exactly right, and it can be difficult having that conversation, whether that's upwards or to a client, to make sure that everything's in order. And there does need to be education, and those of us that are placed for it need to carry on doing that and making sure that, as I use metaphors a lot, and it's like, if you're building a house, you need more than a power drill. Power drill's cool, but you need more than that, and you need expertise. It's not just the tools, you need the people to use the tools correctly. So you start with your problems, understand what the problems are. So whenever anyone comes to me with, look at this, isn't this cool? And it's like, well, yes, but where's the use case? What are we trying to solve? Go back to that, and it's like, okay, well, we've got a problem to solve. Do we even have the data? Do we have the capability to build this? How are we going to test this? How are we going to trust it? And there are use cases where machine learning techniques or LLMs are absolutely fine, and you can pipeline them in and it's nice and straightforward. But there are plenty where it's really not, where you need that audit. Maybe for a regulator, they've really got to have very, very strict understanding of the accuracy of what you're doing, of thresholds, of understanding sort of how any solution got to its answer. And sometimes you might be limited in what tools you can use because you have to conform. So if you start with that problem and look at what's available to you, both from tool set and data and also what's in your pipeline, and then move forward from that, you're far more likely to have a more successful project than if you just go, oh, here's an API, I'll just start throwing data at that and then just spit out whatever comes out the other end into an email and send it off. So it's those sorts of things that you kind of have to put the brakes on a little bit and just say, let's just think about this properly, rather than putting all of our focus on doing something that does have quite a big cost and may not actually solve our problems.
And answering your question literally, Michael, it's stories. It's the power of stories. That's why I mentioned Canada Airlines, right? We all automatically know what that is. It's a great story. We can tell some CEO of, yeah, would you like it just inventing business practices you don't actually have, And it's hard, right? That those of us who are engineers have to suddenly become storytellers. But I think that's the deal of this. As Alberto said, it's a mystical beast that none of us, most of us who don't have PhDs, I couldn't write a transformer to save my life, but I could read the wiki article. But how do I make this real for somebody who doesn't even code or doesn't even structure data or what have you? I've got to tell them a story. And so this is why Canada Airlines was beautiful, and there's other good stories out there. But your point, Janet, you said metaphor. It's the same thing, right? It's what's that story that I land to say. Houses are such great analogies in tech, actually. I really love houses as an analogy in tech, not assembly lines. I don't like them. But houses, because to Alberto's point, what's the foundations? Can we even put this stuff into an Excel spreadsheet before you get fancy with anything else, right? Yeah. And building on that thing. I think that the hard part for me is the product management of this, which is some of us, we can get some data and we can say, I think there's some gold in here. There's some sentiment or user behavior or something. There's something to predict. But writing that story about, give me some budget to explore this, to find out if there's something in it, that is so hard. So yeah, when you get the top down of, can we do LLM? Okay, maybe. It's the bottom up of, I think there's something here we could leverage or take some advantage of or customize or personalize for our customers because we have the insight, but I don't know. It's unproven revenue, right? Making those stories is also, that's the hardest thing ever. If I could do that, then, I wouldn't be in this job, obviously. But yeah, it's the power of stories. It's always that answer for people.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because trying to be the host and not a panelist on this one, but it's we often talk about sort of machine learning and people want to get involved in LLM and this big AI hype, and now I very often talk to them about enablers versus direct application. Like there's you jumping straight to the solution, you're jumping directly to the application versus your enablers. And you talk about kind of Excel spreadsheets and having your data in the right way. What are some of the key enablers that we're looking for in a business? We're starting to talk more and more about this unlocking value, like driving towards value is you need to get those enablers placed first before you go to the direct application that then unlocks your business value. What are some of the enablers that we're looking for in our businesses or in businesses that we consult with or work with that really are the cornerstones to enabling AI in the way that the magical beast analogy comes to life?
For me, is a very obvious one, which is talent in the business. So yeah, and usually they have the right talent and technical talent, right? Because it's those foundations, we are talking about technology foundations here, right? And if they have technical talent, what I have seen is that they are able to kind of get faster to whatever is their use case, because you're going to have a big diversity of use cases in there, right? And it changes a lot if it's something that is facing a customer or something that is internal and is going to have a human in the loop and is going to be working alongside people. So it has different flavors in terms of how you bring it into production. But what is super critical is have the right talent, the people that, has the all, software development expertise and is able to kind of plug these things, think about how to bring applications into production and that framework of, okay, we need to test things. We need to just look at all these different aspects that happen in a normal technology operation. That's how I think about it.
I completely agree that without those people in the right places, you will go down the wrong route, even if you have everything else. So you've got to have someone that understands what needs to be done. And this is one of the problems where you have businesses that just try and go external with that talent, because you might get you might get the people that can do the things, but they won't necessarily understand your business. So if you are sort of outsourcing that talent somehow, then you need to make sure that they work so closely with people who can talk to them properly and understand those problems, or again, you'll have issues. I mean, and then foundationally, obviously, the data and the legality around the data, because too often you have people, they think they've got some data, but they can't move it from certain places worldwide. They can't send it to third-party APIs. This is the big one. It's like so many people want to use these wonderful startup tools that are out there, but legally they cannot send customer data to those locations or even outside of their own private environments, which then limits what they can do. And while there's other solutions that they can put in place, understanding that's critical, because you don't want to be launching a new tool just because you've done something with some dummy data, only to find that you can't actually run it in production. So that people and that really understanding the data and what you can do with it is absolutely fundamental. And without those two things in concert, then you're just really going to struggle. I can't think of an example where those two things not being properly in place has led to a successful outcome, but I can think of many where it has become successful because those two things have been got. And then the company buy-in. I mean, we've talked about sort of the hype and the excitement of it, but you will also have the detractors who will be wanting to stick to existing processes, whether that's because there's comfort around them, whether that's because the ROI measures are in place, or even a misunderstanding of what they are and aren't allowed to do in that industry. So trying to get people on board with what you're doing, also really helps with that success factor early on, but that's more of a secondary concern. You've got to have talent and you've got to have the information you need.
Yeah, and I want to build on Janet's point about the legality and governance, because I think there's a key point here. If you've got talented people and if you've got some data, but if they can't put that data on their own machines, run it in a Jupyter notebook, start querying it, start visualizing it, then they can't do anything for cheap. Everything has to be done on some server. Everything has to be processed on chunks of data. So that point about let's get that governance right. If we need to pseudonymize stuff or we need to supplant some other data with it, but it's that testing data set. So a technical person can get into this, explore it, understand it, and get you a read on whether there is any value in here or not. Is there a pattern? Is there statistical significance? Is there something? Laptops are so powerful these days. It's a crime to not process stuff locally, right? And if you look at what we do with just regular software engineering, we always say local first, build local first, have containers, get this stuff moving, then check it in later, and only test at the very end of that flow in production or in your sort of test environments. But with data, too often, because people haven't got the right processes, haven't got the right governance in place, haven't got the right systems to anonymize the data or whatever else they need to do, they're stuck with experimenting with dummy data, as Janet said, which might have complete false positives or negatives in there. And then you suddenly run something on your big expensive server and find out you've got garbage and you've just wasted a bunch of time. So yeah, I know this sounds weird, an engineer talking about legality, but that is the biggest single blocker to doing this stuff well, is being confident with what you can do with that data, and not just what anyone in your org can do with it. I find that really challenging sometimes, is overcoming people's fear of, people are rightly afraid of GDPR, right? They should be. You should protect people's data, but doesn't mean to say you can't do anything with it. You just need to be smart about what you do with it and how you process it. And I think most companies, I haven't seen that done well very often. I think Just Eat did a pretty good job of it. From my time there, we did GDPR quite well, but I think to your point, there was a lot of fundamentals and foundational work done there over many years to get to a place where that was doable. But yeah, it's that for me is the thing, is knowing what you can do with the data.
So
you can get some good synthetic data. It's just that in itself needs talent and art to make sure that you've encapsulated the problem correctly in your synthetic data. You can't just randomize some fields and throw it into whatever you're building, or you'll end up with complete garbage. But getting some really high quality synthetic data based on stuff that is there can really help. But again, you need the right talent and the right understanding of the problem set and the statistical analysis. I mean, got to bring statistics into it because, you know, being in the RSS, but that core analysis of what the data is and what you're looking for and what shape is it, is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, yeah, as you said, with that rubbishy dummy data, you're just really going to struggle.
And it's the first thing you learn in A-level stats, right? Is figuring out the distribution of your data so you can figure out what to do with it. But to your other point, one of the things that most surprised me, I think this was 2017 when I was at Just Eat and I was doing some anomaly detection, was that there aren't just prizes for machine learning algorithms, there's actually prizes for data. That was a bit of a surprise to me, and it generally surprises people when I say them that there are, as you say, there are synthetic datas. There's also sort of public domain data you can get. I find PhD papers a great source of data when I need to try and do some analysis and stuff like that. But yeah, it's when you're, certainly as a consultancy like us, it's very difficult because I'd love to do some work, but unless I've got a client with the data, we don't have a lot of data ourselves for that kind of thing. So yeah, hence why I know a bit about PhDs. Stellar composition data was the last stop we were looking at, just because I could get hold of it easily.
Yeah, and I guess that, well, on the data bit, there are ways of even, you know, generating data from your existing database without really kind of touching on that personal side, right? But you were talking about running it locally earlier on, right? And one of the things that perhaps we're going to be talking about in 12 months, 18 months time is going to be this plethora of small language models, basically small fitting in your Apple M3s or M4s or whatever it's going to be. Probably will see the likes of Google and Apple starting to release those models big enough to fit in a phone and so on. So there's going to be a different set of problems, right, with production, with technology teams managing, you know, all these different micro GPTs that are going to be running around, and how you bring all those ones into production. But the problems don't go away in terms of kind of data processing. Even if it runs on your local machine, you will still have your usual technology operations issues that need to be dealt with, right? It will become more, you know, same things that have been happening for the last 20 years, I guess.
Mm.
And so we're talking a lot about sort of large data sets and applying AI to data sets that may be sort of customer facing. What about AI in terms of enabling internal teams, right? We've seen recently GitHub workspaces come out, so sort of enhancing developer productivity. So where do we see kind of that sort of the internally, when we say unlocking true business potential, AI having the potential to actually improve your own business processes or increase throughput within your own business? Grant, I know you probably got quite a strong opinion on this.
Yeah, no, we've been doing a lot of work on that. As I said, there's some fairly well researched stuff out. I mean, given it's only been a few months, but there's some very well researched stuff out about changes to productivity for certain knowledge worker applications. All of them rely on there being a human doing the testing, right? So take that into account. It's just consider it a productivity tool, right? You know, AI has been built into Notion for a long time. It's being built into all sorts of products and stuff. This is, but again, this is where sort of some of the software engineering testing rules can help us out. First of all, you need policies. You need policies to protect yourself from this stuff, right? AI will plagiarize. That's its entire job in a way, you could argue. So if you're going to bring this work into your work, you need anti-plagiarism tools to protect you from that stuff. You know, we've had that stuff in software testing for a long time, making sure we didn't use closed source software in open source projects and all that kind of stuff. So those techniques need to come across as well a little bit. And so you've got this idea that in order to take advantage of something, you also need to be able to protect yourself from it. So we come back to governance, policy, those sorts of things need to be in place. These are some of those foundational things. So one of the things that I know is still quite contentious in some companies, you know, is developers using these tools in coding challenges and interviews and stuff. We personally allow it, but one of the things that our interviewers have found is it's having the old sat-nav effect. You know, that whole thing where people drive into rivers and stuff because they were following a sat-nav? We're seeing good developers making silly mistakes because the AI is telling them to, and they're saying out loud, oh, I don't think this is right, but they're doing it anyway. It's a pattern that sort of is emerging at the moment. So again, you then get into, okay, so I've got policy, I've got legals, all that kind of stuff is governed. I now need to train people on this stuff. Even if it seems obvious, because I'm talking to this thing just like I talk to you, I can't trust it. Not because I've got any kind of Skynet problem, but just because literally I can't test it. I don't know the algorithm it's running. And even if I could see it, I wouldn't know what to do with the thing, right? So there's that element of, I think, if we're going to have this idea of AI as a UI, which is kind of what this stuff is sort of doing, you know, it's a UI on Google or whatever, then just like in the old days of Google, where we used to learn how to kind of use Boolean operators and figure out how to tune the results for ourselves, we kind of need to do that again now with LLM. And so that's where I think I've seen some numbers and I've validated them with my own and my own team's experience of something like 20 to 40% productivity boost on common tasks like emails or writing simple code and that kind of stuff. When you start pushing it, you know, it'll write you code that looks quite reasonable, will not execute, doesn't do a damn thing. We found AWS Code Whisperer failing to write CloudFormation. You'd think it'd be able to do that. It's the same company, right? But doesn't always. So yeah, I think there's this combination of legal policy, processes, training, just like any other tool. You know, we would train people how to, you know, if we were investing in a new language or something else, we would train people how to do it. We'd make sure they had resources available. The same thing needs to happen here. What I think is valid, going back to almost your very first question, is in tech, we have this approximately 6 to 10 year cycle of new things, right? I'm old enough to have seen quite a few of these now. And the narrative has been the same since the 40s, which is with this tech, we will no longer need X. When the first operating system was invented at MIT, we will no longer need computer operators. I was one in the 90s, so that wasn't true, right? So this same thing is happening again. It's always the same hype cycle. We'll no longer need this thing. What I found is, if you go look at that history, what we do is, it's not that we don't need something anymore. We do more interesting and sophisticated things. And that talks to what we were talking about earlier, which is this is another tool in an arsenal of tools that gives us an additional capability that comes with risks and challenges, and we need to protect ourselves from it, and we need to train people in it and all of those things. There's no silver bullet in this world. I think we have this, I'm going to get political a bit now, but we have this problem where people look just for the next quarter, where actually, no, there's a game here and it is years in the making. And the people who will come out on top have already got a strong machine learning culture. They've already got a lot of these foundations in place. And when this comes along, they're now in a position to say, how is this an advantage to me? Or have I got a use case that smells like it's this shaped? And I think some of those companies are already out there and having some quite compelling offerings and are trying to navigate through this stuff. But yeah, for anyone out there thinking, that's it, I've just shortcut machine learning, I've just shortcut all this stuff, I'll just ask this computer what the answer is. Yeah, I wouldn't trust it. So I think it's, for me, training is a key consideration. And for even the most technical people, understand this thing is hallucinating all the time. It's just sometimes you like the hallucinations,
Getting it wrong.
sometimes you don't.
It's not hallucinating.
Yes, exactly.
I completely agree with you, Grant. It's that governance bit is huge. Even when you're using these tools, really understand, you know, if you're using it to help write your code, is it also looking at the rest of your code? Where is the rest of your code going? And is that IP leaking somewhere and potentially being part of someone else's? That's really important to understand. So you do need to protect yourself with governance. Again, I know there are some bad practices there where data sets are checked into GitHub, but you know, if you've added Copilot to your repo, then it will see everything and it will use things. The performance, absolutely, we're seeing the same thing, that for those simple tasks, yeah. I mean, when I did my PhD, that was pre-Google. And if you think how hard it would be to write code when you have to go to the library to look things up. And then, I mean, I think Ask Jeeves was around then, but that was pretty rubbish. And then we had Stack Overflow, and then we had all of these great tools. And this is the next sort of gentle evolution of that rather than having to work out, it will autocomplete for you. But just as when you're cut and pasting code from Stack Overflow, you need to understand what it is that you're looking at and be able to work out whether it's going to do the right thing and not just blindly do it. And I think my concern for the future is that we are training up a series of young people who are using these tools very effectively for simple tasks, but then don't have that core computer science programming knowledge to know where it's going wrong and to be able to then do the, you know, 60 to 80% of more complicated tasks. And that's where, you know, maybe the AIs will catch up with that, but, you know, that's where we really need that human knowledge to be able to look at those issues, because you know, a lot of stuff's already been done. No one writes operating systems anymore or printer drivers and things like that. I mean, maybe some companies do, but on the whole, we're looking to do new things. And new things are not encapsulated in these LLMs at the moment. So you need to have that training and knowledge. And that's where I worry we're losing things at the moment. So again, yeah, if you're going to use them, they will provide productivity. So the quick things you will churn out a lot faster. And exactly as Warren said, that will leave your team to be able to focus on the interesting stuff that requires, you know, proper thinking. Cassie Korskov, I think, coined it really well. It's like, let the machines do the thunking, you know, the stuff that's really dull and dreary, and let the humans do the thinking. And I think that's where we get to, and where businesses will see all of the best productivity, but you've got to check the homework and make sure it's exactly what you need it to be doing.
I think it's analogous in terms of, I do believe that society has solved that problem. So calculators started to appear a few decades ago, yet still we teach kids how to sum, multiply, and then we force them to go, through all the, painful process of learning all the, basic maths. And I guess that obviously this technology has been going, the implementation or how, it has arrived has been going pretty fast, right? And it feels like it's getting faster and faster, new models and so on. So I think that it has perhaps caught in the back foot, but as a society, we need to understand how to, okay, these learning aspects, super important, Janet, I 100% agree with you. You need to separate that piece from, the AI, even from the GPT-7s that may come in a few years' time, that might be super powerful, but, that component is super important. It teaches you how to think. But in terms of, as well, I think that is super important. We have been talking a lot about perhaps people with technology background, right? But the vast majority of the workforce, right? If you look at UK, they are not going to be technology background. And I think that I do believe that during the last 18 months, everybody had their go at checking what ChatGPT is, right? Or kind of playing or throwing a couple of questions. But where we're going to be having a lot of productivity improvements is if we get non-technology workforce get access to this tool, and not to just blindly copy and paste stuff, but start to use it in more mature ways in whichever domain they are kind of working on, right? Understand where it fails, understand where it fails, understand that, well, it could be valuable for certain things, but your domain expertise, whatever you are expert on, is still there, it's still safe. Yeah, but this thing can make you much better. Yeah, or get you things done a bit faster, right? And I think that companies are, I guess that they are a bit missing the point of humans in the loop, people with no technology background, and giving them the access to these tools and allowing them to learn how they work, get more comfortable with them. I think this is really where the big opportunity is in the next few months, I guess, and a couple of years.
What's tricky about that is most of the companies I work with and speak to really struggle to articulate value. And so it's quite difficult. I totally agree with what you said, Alberto. Let's say we equip an entire marketing department with LLM and we train them and they're great at it. Could that company express how much extra value it got? And again, this is that kind of narrative thing. It's a hard thing to get that, what's the relative value of, a particular marketing email versus, a security patch, right? The marketing email could be worth billions. Is that easy to articulate? Who knows?
Yeah. But even it might be more on the trivial things that happen on a day-to-day basis, right? That help you to do. I mean, in any department it can be happening, right? I think that Microsoft is trying to kind of play quite hard with integrating Copilot into the 365 toolkit, and obviously Google doing the same. Everybody wants to jump into that space. Tools don't work yet, I guess, not as expected, and I think that it would be a mistake to believe that the tools are going to be displacing the worker. But I think that it is important for the worker to get exposed to those tools, integrated in the Office 365 or Google Docs, whatever, earlier, even if it doesn't work fantastically well, because I think that it will take a while for people to get familiar with the technology, to understand what is going to be their place. There's a lot of fear about, oh, I'm going to get this place, right? I was kind of writing these things before, and now, this thing can write pretty well. Well, think about how your job is going to evolve if you can have this amazing technology at your side to, get that quality of emails that you were doing before, or whatever you were doing before, faster than before. Maybe not 10x, but faster than before. So maybe that will give you some space, some thinking space to do other things. And I guess that I miss. There needs to be a bit of leap of faith, right? So this is where the big execs need to think about, okay, if this is going to be amazing, right? Okay, start with your workforce, right? Don't think so much about the ROI in the next quarter, as you were kind of saying later on, right? Later on. So yeah, it's just those basic things where humans with domain expertise are going to be the best position to control if the output is the right one or not. Yeah. I
think that's one of the things that we're seeing the most is people want to apply AI to something. They're like, where's the something we can apply? We want to say that we're doing AI, and we want to say that we've applied AI to something. And we've mentioned it a couple of times on this webinar already. Is the use cases. So it's how do you take the use case, work out where the AI application is, and how that multiplies your value. Like how do you connect that? Because it's almost like those things are being treated as three separate entities. There's the AI thing, then we've got a bunch of use cases, and then we've got this mythical thing called value that we're trying to sort of extract the whole time. So it's connecting those things together. Janet, you look like you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is the problem, and it's usually the people in each of those buckets are separate in a business. So making sure that you can get those people talking is absolutely crucial, because we won't see the desire to get AI working go away. I mean, as Alberto said, loads of people have played with these tools. Although I would say, the statistician in me, I would be curious to know how many people who are really outside of tech have played with it, because I think everyone inside of tech will have probably had a go. But I can think of quite a lot of my friends who don't work with a computer on a day-to-day basis who still don't know what ChatGPT is. So if there's, it's a very, very small and insignificant sample set, but, just across the country, I'd love to know sort of who is actually worried about AI taking their jobs, who's excited about it. But getting that across, if we want productivity as an economy, we've got to get these tools out there with all of the caution and the training and everything that we've discussed. And then I think once we have that general education, we should start seeing things come together. But from a business point of view, we can't wait for that. We've got to get the people with the use cases and the people with the hype and the people that know how to do things together to get some of these successful outcomes, because at the moment, they're just not. And when you have just one of those corners driving things, you don't get value.
Yeah, I think there's again, there's this narrative that we've all heard a few times of the emergence, right, of a machine learning capability that suddenly spotted something it wasn't asked to do because it found some correlation and it found a causal relationship or something. And everyone wants that, I think. I think a lot of this hype is, please tell me the magical thing that I can't find on my own. And I'm not a great expert, but all of those things where it's doing sort of examinations of X-rays and all that kind of stuff, that's a research project that had millions put into it over a long period of time. It was probably getting the results that were being paid for, and then it got this additional benefit. It wasn't that somebody just happened to have petabytes of X-rays that they smashed into a bit of Python or something. And again, I know this is like a stuck record, that it's about the basics, it's having these things in place, those kinds of stuff. There will be people who will find these emergent things, these causal relationships, these things that nobody would have just like stumbled across or whatever. But it will come because those basics are in place. People know how to handle the data. They've got the policies. They've done the basic, all that boring stuff, right? The boring stuff is what leads to the results. The thing is, it doesn't make headlines. It doesn't make headlines that this team spent 10 years working on this, and then they magically found this extra thing, right? It's always an overnight success. And so in terms of taking it back to Alberto's point, I think for me, a lot of these statistical analytical tools, machine learning and AI. It's about optimizing something that's already there. And yes, you might magically find some gold that you weren't expecting. You might get some education somewhere else, but it's because you were actually looking at an existing set of processes. You were evolving them, you were taking them better. You had a mature process for processing this stuff. And then some bright spark said, oh, what if? And because those basics in place, that, oh, what if could be done in a few minutes, then they could share it with some friends, then it gets peer reviewed. Suddenly now you've got the gold. And so, yeah, not wishing to be boring, but it isn't about spend £1 million this quarter and bingo, you'll make 10 million next quarter. It's more a matter of there is value in data. There are ancient tools, 19th century mathematics tools, to help you understand what its distribution is and what you can do with it and what gold you might be able to get from it. You invest in those things, you hire those people, you put the tools in place, you put the policies in place, and at some point you will get some of this stuff. And I think the companies that are going to make a big name, everyone's going to think it was overnight, and then you do a quick Google and you see they've been doing this for 10 years already.
Sorry, Alberto, you look like you wanted to chip in there.
No. I mean, 100% agree with what he was saying. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm just going to post the link to the feedback into the chat. So if anyone would be so kind as to give us some feedback, the link is in the chat now, so you can jump on there and start jumping into it. With 10 minutes left, I was just going to ask for some success stories and/or some stories where you'd actually learnt something either through failing or through a near miss, if you will, just about this unlocking business value using AI. I mean, Grant and I have got loads of customer stories where we've seen people try something for years and years and years, and then you turn it around in a couple of weeks and they go, oh, that's brilliant. And actually, no, it's because of all the work that came before us, right? We didn't solve it in the last 2 weeks. We just built on the months of work that have come before us. But just from each of you, an interesting story or a real learning point where we can put some of this into reality, where you've taken AI or machine learning or MML, whatever part of the AI sort of sphere you have, that you've come to a success, or you've had some sort of failure that you've learned from. Picking through the examples and trying to pick one.
Yeah, I mean, it is tricky because there's, if you're doing these sorts of projects, anyone with any experience, you can see the fails happening before they happen, and try and subvert them. So for proper failures, I'd have to go up very far back in my career, and it wouldn't necessarily be relevant. But I think, and it's probably going to be a little bit dull, but to get the success, it's all the things we've been talking about. So some of the clients I work with, and they want to go straight in and have the AI product in their anti-money laundering system, and their data is just not right. They still have very siloed data, and having that conversation with them that right now they're not ready. They need to get the data from all of these siloed sources into one place. Otherwise, while we could layer the AI on top, the answers it will give them won't be helpful. So it's going through that education piece of one, get your data in the right place. Then from a regulatory point of view, you've got to have some very deterministic old school statistics to cover the majority of your use cases, because that's what the regulators need. So you've got to get all of those rules, definitions in place and make sure they're happy. And then we can layer the AI on top to help you deal with some of your false positives, and also help you find those false negatives, and you get fined for both. So you really need to focus on those. And then I guess just as an aside for that, we get an awful lot, particularly in the finance world, people saying, get rid of my false positives. I'm overwhelmed by false positives, particularly in the screening space where they're looking for sanctioned individuals. And you can have the conversation with them. I can remove 100% of their false positives, but I'll introduce a lot of false negatives. So getting them to really articulate what is their risk appetite, what are they comfortable with, how many of these things do they want to investigate to ensure that they don't miss anything. And a lot of times people can't articulate the parameters of their problem for AI. So having that conversation And even in that simple use case with false positives, there's the ones that are easy that you never want to see, but there'll be the ones that you always want to investigate, even if they, even if they turn out to be false positives. And when you're just looking at a label that says, false positive, true positive, making sure that you train any AI system into don't throw these away, even though they've got this label, these are the ones we want to see, takes nuance, and it takes that domain expertise as well as the technical expertise, which we talked right back at the beginning with what you needed, not just the data, but really understanding the problem. Because you take that problem as it was and just say, we've reached the false positives, and hand it to, the Kaggle community or wherever else, and they'll turn the handle and they'll do stuff, but with whatever sample data set you've been given. But then when you try and put that in production, it will have huge problems. So yeah, the success is down to domain expertise, technical expertise, and client education with the underlying data set.
Cool.
For me, I'll tell you about particular use case, but I will tell you about the first one because I have seen the pattern repeated for years and years and years, and it's the critical role of domain expertise. And domain expertise, I mean, when you are trying to kind of solve a particular use case, there's always a human that may not have any engineering, technology, science background that is the expert on that particular domain. And I came across this thing for the first time building a machine learning project for EasyJet back in 2008. For trying to kind of replicate the decisions of the traders, right? They have traders there, and they were just putting the prices up and down and things like that. And back then, it took a couple of years almost, but I managed to train a neural network that was replicating with 98% accuracy. The numbers were fantastic, but those are the final numbers after 2 years of working hard on it. But really, the things started to improve because the numbers were terrible at the beginning. When I brought the trader, right, the pricing manager expert sitting at my side and try to understand why they made that decision and not the other, and try to kind of see, okay, why that wasn't picked up by the model. And I think that those conversations, and when you bring the domain experts, you walk them through the technology and you make them part of, you are going to be just as well creating this product with me, is when things end up being successful, in my opinion. It's not a guarantee, but increase your chances of getting things right. And I have seen that in EasyJet, and more recently even with on large language model projects, right, where that domain expertise, that person that is completely outside the technology space, when they jump in there, they can help you quite a lot.
Cool. And Grant?
Yeah, so I'll start with a commercial one, and then I'll go to what I think is a bit more interesting. So we were doing a bit of work with a retailer, and there was this hypothesis that personalization would lead to great uptick in conversion, all the rest of it. And it was sort of a traditional machine learning project based on customer activity, that kind of stuff. One of the surprising results that came out from it was that the vast majority of customers actually fit into 6 bucket types. So it wasn't really necessary to personalize. It was really just necessary to understand which of those buckets somebody fit into. And that saved a ton of time, because building 6 different variances of the website and exposing it to the person that you suspected it was a much quicker and simpler piece of work than trying to personalize the experience every single time. So that was a fairly traditional machine learning thing. It was possible because web behavioral data is quite well understood and quite easy to manipulate these days. The surprising one that I think is more interesting was, this was not long after the GPTs were released. We were, in 101 Ways, we were doing a ton of work trying to figure out what are the limitations of this thing? What can it do? What can't it do? What does it struggle with? What does it rock at? And knowing only the very basics, we knew it was a forecasting system. So, okay, what else can it forecast other than the next word? And we found this blog article someone had written about using LLMs to predict house price data. And they included their data set. They had a little spreadsheet so we could go have a look. So we tried it, and it predicted house price data. But we were a bit suspicious. And basically what we figured out was, it wasn't predicting house price data based on the spreadsheet it was given. it was just because house price data is blogged about so much. It had consumed so much training data that included house price data. It was making its forecast based on that. It wasn't looking at the data we were providing it at all because we put nonsense in there, right? And it didn't react to it. And that was my first realization of, I don't know the weighting in this thing. I don't know what it thinks is important, right? And even when you download your own from Hugging Face or whatever, you only have the highest level parameters you can tune, right? You can't get in there and do everything unless, you know, obviously you're qualified to build one of these things. So for me, the interesting part about this was that you can give an LLM a whole bunch of data and it might well just ignore it anyway if it's been pre-trained on something else. So we then built our own, not from scratch, right? We downloaded one from Hugging Face, we gave it a bunch of data. And we thought this was pretty safe. We basically gave it a bunch of RFP data that we had written for various clients and that kind of stuff to see if it could write an RFP. Basically, I was trying to save myself from having another respond to another RFP, right? That was my ultimate goal here. And it literally made stuff up that we had never written. So one of the things was, you know, give a history of your company or something, right? The story it told about the formation of 100 Ways was utter rubbish. No one had ever written it, ever. And it was one of those moments of, I don't even know where it would get that from, right? I couldn't tell you because like I gave it 19 documents. I knew exactly what was in them and it just made this rubbish up. And it was, you know, it got some of the names right, but none of the circumstances. And it was almost like a kid telling a story. So I think that the thing for me, that the learning I would ask everyone to kind of internalize is, like all code, if you didn't write it, if you don't understand it, you don't know what it's doing. So treat it with skepticism and test it, which, as we've just described, really hard to do with an LLM, right? But at least you can give it the human test. So yeah, don't trust them. Just use it as an advisor and nothing more.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. That was awesome. Thank you for all your insights. That's been really valuable. I've really enjoyed this conversation. We could probably sit here and chat about this for another couple of hours, but you know, people have got busy diaries. So last thing to do is just to thank you all for your time. Thank you for joining us here. Thank you for our attendees for sitting and listening. Hoping you've taken away some valuable, interesting insights from it. If you could just click on that link in the feed and give us feedback, that would be really, really appreciated. As I said earlier, this is being recorded. It will go out on our website tomorrow. And last thing is just to follow 101 Ways on LinkedIn, and just we'll try and keep you all up to date with when the next webinar is. I will be looking at data and AI for the rest of this quarter. So thank you all for coming along, and as I say, do follow us and stay in touch. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm going to end it now. So thank you all, and we'll chat to you soon. Thanks all. Bye.